So you're Elon Musk. Not today's Elon Musk, but 2001 Elon Musk. You're around 30 years old and you're no longer a child prodigy anymore.
Musk sold his first computer program at the age of 12, and he hasn't stopped selling since.
SpaceX wasn't a thing, Tesla wasn't a thing, and you had a receding hairline that magically went away. You hit it big with PayPal during the dot-com boom in Silicon Valley, and now you're left with all this money lying around. Now, most people in this situation would probably sit back and enjoy the fruits of their labor as they think to themselves of how they finally made it. But you're different. You view money as not the end game, but a tool. The startup life in the place where you used to pull 23-hour workdays is starting to lose its charm. All people ever talked about was funding, IPOs, how many hours they worked, the big paydays they were chasing, and you had a gut feeling that it was time for a change. That maybe you were meant for more in life than just creating internet services. That maybe Silicon Valley was just a stepping stone for you. So you decide to move to LA, but not for the glitz and glamour that most people move there for. No. You intentionally chose LA for very specific, logical reasons. Now that you're out of the startup race with more money than you could have ever wished for, you've had some time to ponder on life and to revisit your childhood fantasies about space travel. And you decide that the pursuit of space would be the start of the next chapter of your life. Now, you don't know exactly what you want to do in the space industry, but you knew that LA was one of the main hotbeds for aerospace since the 20s because of its mild and consistent weather. Whatever you decide to do, you'd be surrounded by the top experts with a very large talent pool to recruit from. So LA, here we come. Although you didn't know much about space or rocket science at the time, you quickly made some well-connected friends who did. And the more you thought about space, the more you realized just how important space exploration was for humanity with the next logical step of colonizing Mars. Not just because humanity will inevitably come to an end if we're not on more than one planet, but because interplanetary exploration is so intrinsically intertwined with the very idea of America itself. It's part of our human spirit. But here's the problem. When you visited NASA's website, there was literally nothing. No plan, no schedule, no nothing about going to Mars. NASA, the agency responsible for pushing the boundaries of space, wasn't just making slow progress in interplanetary travel, they had no intentions of it whatsoever. What happened to the spirit we had for the final frontier during the Apollo days? You're obviously a pretty smart guy, and you come to the conclusion that everything comes down to public support. The general public holds the key to everything you want in life. If they support what you want, in this case space travel, the money, the funding, and the supporters will follow. If they don't support what you want, well, you have the American space efforts of the early 2000s. During the Apollo days, we had the evil enemy of the Soviet Union we had to beat, so rallying behind getting to the moon was something that we could all enthusiastically get behind. We had something to prove. But today, there's no real perceived need or desire to go to space. How are you going to change that? So you brought together a bunch of experts and tasked them with coming up with some kind of grand spectacle that would reinvigorate people's spirit to get to Mars again with a budget of around $20 million. The first idea you were throwing around was to send some mice to Mars, have them return, and mate along the journey. That ended up not being the most practical idea ever, so you guys settled on another idea, called the Mars Oasis. You would buy an old ICBM, retrofit it to send a robotic greenhouse to Mars. The greenhouse would then suck in Martian soil and hopefully grow the first plants on Mars with a video feed back to Earth. Still pretty ambitious, but a lot more practical than the mice to Mars idea. So it's time to go ICBM shopping. Even though all of your friends and family tried to talk you out of your space ambitions so you wouldn't waste all your money, you and a few friends hop on a flight to Moscow. This was during the post-Soviet Union days where the Russians were open to bartering off stuff to rich guys, making it optimal for your Mars Oasis mission. When you met with the Russians, however, they weren't too enthusiastic about doing business with you, and after hours of frustrating preamble, slightly buzzed from vodka, you flat out asked how much a missile would cost. $8 million each. You counter with 2 missiles for $8 million. They reply with something like, "Young boy, no," insinuating that you don't have the money, and you storm out of the meeting. The Russians were the only ones that could possibly fit your $20 million budget, so on the flight back, you and your friends were understandably disappointed. You realized that if it cost this much just for a decades-old ICBM, something that isn't even meant to deliver stuff into orbit, we will never get to Mars at this rate. But where there's a problem, there's a sweet opportunity, and you're not gonna let this little hiccup stop you from your life's calling. Then you have a stroke of genius and pull out your laptop and start typing. Your friends are thinking, "Fucking nerd, what could he be doing now?" A little while later, you turn around to your friends with your laptop and say, "Hey guys, I think we can build this rocket ourselves." Armed with a spreadsheet, you broke down the cost of the materials and labor to build and launch a rocket for a fraction of the price of the rusty old Russian rockets. What's more is that we might even be able to build a profitable business around it. See, the only launching companies were using giant rockets to send giant payloads into space, but not everyone can afford these expensive launches. The military, scientists, and private companies also wanted to send smaller satellites into space, but the barrier for entry was just too expensive for them to even consider it. This is where you come in, by undercutting the competition with smaller, cheaper rockets to serve an entirely new customer base. And if it's profitable, you can reinvest all your profits into getting to Mars without having to rely on government's goodwill. That instead of wasting time on these elaborate publicity schemes, you could revitalize people's interest in space exploration by exploring space.
What we're hoping to do with SpaceX is to push the envelope and provide a reason for people to be excited and inspired to be human.
If the Russians won't do it, if the US won't do it, then it's up to you to turn interplanetary travel into a reality. And SpaceX was born. This is that story.
The dawn of a new era of spaceflight is upon us.
By June 2002, after studying rocket science and the space industry for months, Space Exploration Technologies was formed in an old warehouse in LA to compete in an industry that had no evolution in the past 50 years, has practically no real competition, and where all the rocket makers were building Ferraris for every launch, where a Honda Civic might have made do. So here's how you approached it. The goal of SpaceX from a business standpoint was to be the Southwest Airlines of space. The first rocket you would build would be named the Falcon 1, after the Millennium Falcon from Star Wars. And to get to this goal of affordability, you would bring your startup know-how of being lean, moving fast, pivoting fast with limited funds, and applying it to the space industry that's full of these slow-moving bureaucratic behemoths like Lockheed and Boeing. The initial plan looked like this. Most rocket builders had contractors build out all the parts for them, which led to some hefty markups. So you would build your rockets nearly entirely from scratch. And then the goal was to optimize the manufacturing, assembly, and launch process so much that you could launch faster and cheaper than others by orders of magnitude. But the real innovation came from the realization that when we ship things by air, sea, or land, we don't trash the airplanes, container ships, and trailer trucks after one use. So if we can make rockets reusable like other transportation vehicles, we could have multiple profitable launches per month, we could have the hope of getting to Mars, and we would never have to become dependent on government contracts. But first we need to actually get a privately built rocket into orbit before we worry about landing it, which proved to be one of the more tougher engineering hurdles of the 21st century. By the time word got out about SpaceX, almost everyone was thrilled. But here's the thing, you weren't the first entrepreneur to get into the space industry and end up burning all your money away. The history is there, and even with eBay buying PayPal for a nice $1.5 billion, at the most, you would only be able to survive 3 or maybe 4 rocket launches to make Falcon 1 work before going bankrupt.
How much of your personal fortune have you poured into this?
$100 million.
$100 million into something that you did not believe would work at the beginning.
Yes.
Even though you're a pretty smart guy, you're not going to get anywhere anytime soon without an all-star team. In fact, finding the right talent is usually one of the biggest bottlenecks for any business. If you want to attract talent, you have to be a company worth working for, which is exactly what SpaceX was. For the first time in practically ever, young overachievers with no lives fresh out of college, your ideal employee, didn't have to join these giant bureaucratic companies or government agencies if they wanted to work in the space industry. SpaceX offered a breath of fresh air.
I literally walked into Boeing and I said, hey, I could be an intern, and they laughed at me and they said there's a whole process that I have to go through. I went there. So then he called over Elon, and Elon was like, we could use the help. Sure, sounds good.
It was a small, tight-knit family up against the world.
So you have so much background in engineering. You could have easily gotten a job at Boeing or at Lockheed, but you came here.
If you had a chance to go back in time and work with Howard Hughes when he was creating TWA, if you had a chance to be there at that moment when it was the dawn of a brand new era, wouldn't you want to do that? I mean, that's why I'm here.
But the real rite of passage came with building the Falcon 1. This would be the ultimate test to see if a startup could really go up against entire nation states and win. Here's what the process looked like. You design and build the rockets in LA. Employees would then load it onto a U-Haul trailer and drive it halfway across the country to your testing site in Texas. They'd work 12-hour days and run the engines until they broke or exploded, which the engineers called rapid unscheduled disassemblies. Texas would then let LA know what changes to make, new parts would then be shipped from LA to Texas for testing to start all over again, and this would later be known as the Texas Cattle Haul. At the end of each day, they would report back to you. If they were working hard, you'd be perfectly patient when they ran into problems, which was practically every single day. However, if they didn't have a plan of attack to handle the roadblocks they ran into, well, that is where you draw the line. Then, SpaceX got its first customer, the Department of Defense, for a satellite launch that you aimed for early 2004, a very ambitious timeline. With this goal set, 12-hour workdays 6 days a week became the norm, with many working more than that. Fast forward 2 long years past that early 2004 goal, and the Falcon 1 was finally ready for its first test launch on March 24th, 2006.
3, 2, 1, 0, plus 1, plus 2.
20 seconds into the launch and all is well, already a pretty impressive feat for a startup.
Falcon 1 is airborne at this time.
By 25 seconds, however, a fire started above the rocket engine and it came tumbling back down to Earth. Of course you're disappointed, but you remind yourself and the world that all past rockets have only had a few successful launches out of all their testing attempts, so it's back to the drawing board. It took almost an entire year before SpaceX would launch again on March 21st, 2007. This one was much better, with 5 straight minutes of a perfect rocket launch into space.
Stages are separated. Fairing separation is confirmed.
But then it starts to wiggle and eventually blow up. A very respectable improvement over the last one, but we're not quite there yet. And what's worse is that the company could only really last 1, maybe 2 more attempts before you ran out of money, so things are starting to get pretty dire. By 2008, SpaceX was ready for their 3rd attempt, 4 years after the original goal of early 2004. And on August 2nd, 2008, the Falcon 1 launched off.
We have liftoff of the SpaceX Falcon 1 launch vehicle. Falcon has cleared the tower.
Liftoff was good, all the engine checks were good, and everything was going so well until the first stage separated from the second stage and they bumped into each other, damaging the first stage. 6 years of 12-hour workdays and still nothing to show for it. This almost shattered the team, but you kept their spirits up while deep down, you knew that the 4th launch was the make or break point for this company. SpaceX already had another rocket built, so Launch 4 took place around 2 months later on September 28, 2008. Employees were trying not to throw up, the fate of your dream of interplanetary travel was on the line, and with every milestone the rocket hit, the team's cheers only grew.
Stage separation confirmed.
And Kestrel ignition.
And with nearly 10 minutes into the journey, the Falcon 1 shut down its engines and became the first private rocket to reach orbit.
And that would be a nominal SECO. SECO's confirmed! Which means Falcon 1 has made history as the first privately developed launch vehicle to reach Earth orbit from the ground.
So you've finally proven yourself to the world, but you're not in the clear yet. The success of Falcon 1 was great, but it was very short-lived. It was the end of 2008 and both Tesla and SpaceX were so out of money that you had to borrow from friends to make payroll. The next 2 SpaceX projects you already announced, the Falcon 9, a reusable rocket with 9 of the same engines from the Falcon 1, and the Dragon capsule designed to carry cargo and astronauts would both need around $1 billion each to develop with no money in sight. You went from being a famed celebrity entrepreneur to getting ripped apart in the media for your recent divorce and Tesla problems. And to top it all off, we were right at the climax of the 2008 financial crisis, with Lehman Brothers going bankrupt just 2 weeks before your successful Falcon 1 launch. And in your darkest times, ironically, the very thing you didn't want to become dependent on, government contracts, came to your rescue at the very last minute, with NASA awarding SpaceX the contract for 12 resupply missions to the ISS for a blissful $1.6 billion. And the rest was a relatively uphill climb from there. Since those dark days, things have gone as great as you could have ever hoped for. Both Falcon 9 and Dragon saw outstanding success in 2010, Falcon 9 successfully landed back down to Earth in 2015, and your biggest rocket to date, Falcon Heavy, had its first successful flight back in 2018.
That thing took off. Oh my god.
Fast forward to today, and SpaceX heavily undercuts all its competitors all around the world. The Falcon 9 is the main workhorse for the company, and at a price tag of $60 million per launch, it's cheaper for customers than going to Europe, Japan, or even Russia and China by a huge margin. An even bigger rocket named Starship that's meant to go to Mars and even offer transportation around the globe is well underway. Starlink, a giant web of satellites beaming down internet to the hardest to reach places around the globe, will hopefully act as the cash cow needed to fund more Mars planning. The global satellite industry just keeps getting bigger and bigger every year, with the largest numbers at nearly $300 billion in 2018. And although we can't tell how profitable SpaceX is, being that they're a private company, it's safe to say that they're in a pretty good spot. But perhaps most importantly, you've single-handedly inspired a new generation of people excited to explore the final frontier with more space startups today than ever. And it all started with the original plan to fly some mice to Mars on a Soviet-era ICBM. But SpaceX's biggest milestone might be just around the corner. 9 years ago, the US retired the space shuttle program, and since then, America has had to rely on their old enemy Russia to fly to space. But at the time of recording this video, that is set to change on May 27th, with SpaceX's first ever human crew planned to launch up to the ISS, which could be delayed by the time you're watching this video. Just check the news. The two astronauts, Doug Hurley and Bob Behnken, will be flying up in their new Crew Dragon capsule retrofitted for astronauts with touchscreen displays, cool seats, that minimalist aesthetic Tesla and SpaceX are known for, and of course, very futuristic looking pressurized suits. If this mission they're calling Demo 2 is successful, SpaceX will have played a key role in bringing NASA's human space program back to US soil. And after 18 long years, nearly 2 decades, and many more years leading up to that grinding away to have enough money to start SpaceX in the first place, you've come back full circle to your childhood days of fantasizing about space travel, except now it's one step closer to becoming reality. But here's the thing, it's easy to look back on this stuff and say just how obvious reusable rockets were, how obvious it was that our planet isn't the center of the solar system, or how yes, there are absolutely these strange invisible waves that we can't see with the naked eye that we can use to communicate. Quit being silly. It's easy to look back at history and rationalize these things, but statistically, you probably would have been one of those haters putting down Elon Musk. If you were a part of the Roman Inquisition, you probably would have supported throwing Galileo in prison for saying that the sun is the center of the solar system, not our planet. Such hearsay, right? Throw him in the gulag. And I wouldn't be surprised if you or I are acting like this right now about things people are working on today that are supposedly impossible. So I just wanted to end this video with a gentle reminder to keep an open mind to what's possible, and to remind you that the future is up for grabs. Welcome to the Watch the End Club, and if you are still watching right now with like 18 straight minutes into the video, you guys are my biggest supporters, so thank you so much. And if you guys want more like mini documentaries like this, just let me know in the comments, because I can't do these like all the time because they take like a really long time, but I can try my best to squeeze it in here and there if you guys want it. If you guys don't want more mini documentaries like this, that's okay, just put a comment below and just put I watched to the very end to give that YouTube algorithm a nice little boost. If you're new to this channel, please consider subscribing, because I make video essays just like this one every single week on the most provocative stuff in the world of business for absolutely nothing. If you want to support this channel financially, one of the best ways to do so is with the Tran Mafia family, also known as Patreon. You can start as an associate, a soldier, or go all the way in and start as a capo and support this channel's goal of making the world a more curious place. You can follow me on Instagram at jaketran.io. That is gonna wrap it up for this very long video. Thank you so much for watching again, you guys. You've been awesome. I've been Jake. I'll see you guys in the next one.